Hello, this is Jan Speelman with a video version of my latest column, column 126 in fact. I hope you know by now, it's no longer just an Agony column, but basically me doing what I want. And I've been encouraged by Chessbase to reminisce, to do the codgery thing of reminiscing. And so that's what I'm doing today. But I'm talking about openings, and I've entitled the column, I hope I'll keep the title, the Cockroach's Carapace and Other Opening Disasters. So what I've said is when I was little I had a row of chess books on a shelf above my bed. It was I had a bed at the end of the room, and on the wall above my head there was a shelf of chess books. And there were various ones. My first chess book was by Botvinn Morrison, Chess for Children. There were two school teachers. I can't remember. I think it's Stanley Botvinn. I'm not sure. I did look it up yesterday, but or maybe Stanley Morrison. But they did an excellent book for kids learning, and it was the first book really I read for pleasure, I think, and ever. I was 6 at the time, and then later, sometime in the summer of 1963, a little after the Pettersen Botvinn World Championship match, I was with my mum in Tottenham Court Road, which is in the centre of London. We went to a shop for some reason, and there was a chess book, and I persuaded her to buy it, and it was in fact Bob Wade's book on the 1963 World Championship match between Tiger and Pettersen, who defeated the world champion Mikhail Botvinn. And it was my first serious chess book. I'm looking up now, I can see it on my shelf. Or can I know it? I think maybe I've got it out at the moment, or have I put it back? I could see it yesterday anyway. And it's a lovely book, a very interesting account. Bob went to Moscow a bit. He was later my only real chess teacher when I was about 11 or 12. And I consulted him about chess for the rest of his life. Anyway, there are some memorable games, and the most memorable one is the fifth game. And I'm not going to make too much of a fuss about these games. Basically, I'm chattering now, and I'm just sort of saying some stuff about it. So this was the fifth game of the match. Pettersen had lost really horribly in the first, but was starting to, because he was just so nervous. Then he started to fight, and in this one he got a decent position. So Botvinnik's got a position, but I mean, engines say this is equal, but black does have an isolated pawn, and Pettersen apparently said to his second, was it Bondarevsky or Boleslavsky? It was Boleslavsky. That he thought he'd win this position if he reached it against Botvinnik, and he did. They played some moves. That's been given a question mark. The notes here are by, I'm not sure, they're whatever I picked up from Chessbase, and I put in a few diagrams and added a couple of notes of my own. So he's managed to get a nice knight on e4. I mean, it's obviously not a huge thing. Knight takes a2. Well, you're going to have a nice position. There was a variation there. When knight a2, rook to here, knight to there, takes, rook to there. And white's better. White's got this beautiful horse on e4. Whether he's winning is another matter, of course, but he can play chess till the cows come home, and possibly rather longer than that. And if he can get his king in somewhere near black's king, he's going to have real winning chances. Definitely not a position that you'd like. And as one of the things that Pettersen had picked up very well is that Botvinnik hated having passive positions. So he didn't do that. They played some more moves. Somewhere around about here he got it a bit wrong. Tal suggested this line, because then you get the A file, I think, in a moment, and it's not too terrible. And the position was playable, of course, for a long time. It's just it's unpleasant to play. It's not a great move. He took because there's a problem with knight d2 in a minute, followed by moving the bishop, followed by trying to round up that pawn, I think, is certainly the idea. Looking at it now, it isn't so obvious to me, but anyway, he took. And now you've got a very good knight against the bishop. And they played some more moves. The notes here don't give rook d2, which of course you meet just by king b3. You can't take it at once because pawn takes and you lose, but it doesn't mean anything. And so he won a pawn. Maybe the guy should have played bishop takes knight here, because that knight is so strong. But Botvinn has managed to get his pawn back, but the white knight is fantastic on e4. I don't know when this becomes a winning position, but at some point that stops the king from getting out, and this was the adjourned position, which is rather famous. I think it was in I think when I was in somewhere like Tromsø was there were a quiz during the Olympiad. I was there for some of the Olympiad, and there was mentioned which game or something was the king, or where did the king get to. I don't know, I may have thought it was g8, but actually it's g7. I mean, I knew this game very well. Pettersen squeezed Botvinn. Sorry, I should speak English. And round about here he actually gave up, just because it's so awful. If you play h5, well, h6, then you'll lose the g pawn, I suppose, in a moment. You're just going to lose pawns, and you're completely passive. It's I mean, it's a slightly funny position to resign in, I would say. I would have thought he ought to have tried king b7 and saw where he got him. You can play knight e6 or something. I mean, obviously you're winning, but the game still continues. It seems an odd moment to resign to me, but that's what he did. That's that game. Now then I started talking, what did I talk about next in my glorious column? I started talking about some of the other books, and I said that I got Erver and Kramer's 2-volume work on the middle game. I can see that, but I can't because it's hidden by something. I know where it is on my shelves. Bent Larson's Selected Games, 48 to 79, that was a lot of fun. I found that yesterday. And Peter Clark's book on Misha Tal, which very annoyingly actually I can't find on my shelf at the moment. I've found at least 5 other books on Misha Tal, but not that one. I don't suppose I lent it to somebody, that'd be a terrible thing. Also, I got some more books later on this shelf. There was a simultaneous display in Foyle's Bookshop. It's a famous bookshop in Tottenham Court Road. Did I say Tottenham Court Road where I got my first chess book? It was Edgware Road, I'm not sure. Anyway, if people who know the centre of London will know where it is, it's a very famous bookshop. I think it's still there. There was a symbol. I played some guy about 2200-ish, something like that, and I beat him. I was about 9 at the time, so it was not completely implausible that I should beat the guy. I mean, I was 4150, 1800 or something. Strong enough to win a game if a guy blundered. And I got a whole raft of chess books from Pergamon, who was sponsoring the Simul, including The Art of Attack in Chess, which Simon Williams has done for a different platform recently on video. Fantastic book by Vladimir Vukovic. And a book on Pettersen by Alberic Akeli de Gouet, Count Alberic Akeli de Gouet. And as an aside, I noted that when he was arbiter at a team tournament, I don't know if it was Moscow 77, the European Team Championship. Anyway, he asked my team captain, David Anderton, whether David could get myself and order myself and Mestel to get haircuts. And my captain told me this, but didn't order me. But I'm just going to check, do my usual check. It'll be 1 second. You will get a silly screen for 1 second. So let's do this. We are recording. That's excellent. Okay. and then because you're getting a whole screen, so when I check the software, it sees itself and so on. And then there was a complete defence to 1e4, a study of the then, what's called one pawn to king 4, of course, at that time, the Petrov, which was the Petrov by Bernard Cafferty and David Hooper, and the Petrov then was just an opening you played and white didn't know what to do, and if you're a decent player you got a reasonable position. It's a little bit different now, and I had an MCO on my shelf, the 10th edition, which was green. I was searching for it for quite a while yesterday and I did find it. And I gather it was completely revised by Larry Evans under the editorship. I could change that while I'm here. That will not affect. I've got editorship of Walter Korn, who took MCO over in about 1946 and carried on. The 13th edition with Nick DeFermi, and that's the latest one I've got, was still under. He was nominally on it. And I told you, I mean, I remember this quote. I've always remembered this quote. I actually, before I founded the MCO, I remembered it substantively, that I had some of the words wrong. Basically, they were looking at the Yugoslav attack against the Sicilian Dragon, the one that has several whole books written in it now. And Larry Evans said, Black must react promptly and vigorously. Just how is not quite clear. Thank you, Larry Evans. But I mean, I do understand that he just didn't know. And it's sort of, it is in some sense useful because it says there will be a way to do this, but nobody's found it yet. Anyway, I then went on to opening theory and said, well, it's never really been my thing, and I like to avoid main lines, and I gave some games, some more games. So one of them, what is this? That's nothing to do with this. Sorry, I've ended up here, right? Is Speelman Timman, Reykjavik 88. That was before we had a candidates match, and we reached this position, and I truly did not want to play G3 and get involved in the theory, so I made an A3 at the board. And later, I mean, it had been played before, of course. Jan didn't know what to do. This is not a particularly good version. The big difference here is that you have this position with colours reversed, but then Queen B3, Bishop takes Knight, and Queen takes B2 is playable, but here Queen takes B2 loses the Queen to Knight A4, because you control the B4 square, which makes this rather a good position for white. That's a good move, because it means you can't get Queen B6, because if Bishop takes, Knight takes D5. And I got the advantage. He didn't do it very well, but later I messed it up. Jan, yeah. This was all absolutely fine. He's got a very weak isolated pawn. I can't actually take an f6 and take an d5 yet, unfortunately. It does not work, which is annoying. If take, bishop takes b2. And you can play queen b2, but if you play knight f6 check, you lose. Because knight f6, queen, bishop f6, queen takes queen, rook takes d2, rook takes d2, pawn takes queen. And the thing is that this bishop, after rook takes d2, pawn takes queen, the bishop defends the rook. And that's the only thing I'm going to add so far. So you can't do that. And I got to this position and then I got overexcited and I played e4 too early. Actually, Houdini still likes it. He's made me capture. Now this is a mistake. I should play rook d3 and Houdini is still perfectly happy with my position. So bishop takes knight was an error. And I messed this game up and eventually we drew. In fact, Jan almost got better at that point. I was too excited. He could have taken as well. We had a time scramble of some sort. That's a mistake. I thought I'd be able to do something bad to him, but I couldn't. And we drew. So that was the game against Jan, and the interesting thing is the novelty A3. Then I talked about the game I had with Nigel in our candidates match, where we reach this position I castle. I've got it in my own book of best games, which is here, and basically this was a move, castles, which had never been considered before until Mickey Gurevich played it in the Soviet Championship. Was it still? It was still Soviet in '88, I think, wasn't it? In Moscow, in 2 games, and by sheer good fortune, Jonathan Tisdall's then girlfriend, Mariana, later the mother of his 2 kids, they had 2 kids together. She brought over a Norwegian magazine which had this game in, and so at least one of Mickey's games. So I was persuaded by Tiz to play it, and I did. I was a bit nervous about going castles queenside, but I steeled myself, and I won a game. It was the 3rd game I ever played, or possibly the 2nd ever played in this. That's a mistake, actually, it turns out. I played this well, though. I mean, you still have to win your game after you've done this stuff. I didn't. That was a very good move. That's the move that completely kills him, because if rook e7 you just take it and play rook f7, then his game falls apart. He is put to the sword, and so you therefore get a completely winning position. So that was a nice game by me. And then I said, as black, I like to keep my pawn structure, and I like to play the Caro-Kann, which is, I call the Cockroach, because the Russian for a cockroach is a Caro-Kann, so it's quite close. Not very close. I don't think anybody else calls it the Cockroach. But it's not a bad name, because it is one of those things that white tries to squash and then fails to. One hopes. However, sometimes that you play people who do squash it, and this was the only game I lost in the Subotica into Zonland 87 to Misha Tal, and I still won the first equal in the tournament and qualified for the candidates. And Misha completely squashed me. It's annotated by Pavel Blatny in Informata 43, it says up there, and I'll show you quickly. I mean, it's just a suitable disaster. What happens when what used to happen when you took too many liberties against Misha served you right. I'll turn it round so we can have the joy of seeing it from my point of view. This is what they used to do it against it, and they used to play c5, but for some reason I wanted to do something. I always wanted to do something different in the opening. 5. And castles is the move I wanted to play, but it is a liberty against Misha. It was a liberty, and he did not shrink from attacking me in the most vigorous possible terms. Just brought his boys out. G4, quite right. G5, quite right. A6, defending C6 against some incursion. Seems to threaten some horrific thing, doesn't it? Bishop H7, knight F7, bishop G6, bishop takes F7, queen H8, mate, I think. So I had to play G6. So if pawn takes bishop, I'll put this line in as well. Pawn takes bishop, check here. You just take this first. Take, check, yeah. Check. It's more or less what I deserved. And he splatted me. Bishop takes G6. Not a move that Misha would have thought very long about, I think. He would have been pretty certain it worked. And I had a think, and I played Queen G5. Everything else is losing. And here I played the glorious move E5, and I resigned before he played Queen takes bishop. I had not realised that my bishop was not defended. So I was pretty discombobulated in this game. And it's basically an example of white saying, I do not believe you, I'm going to checkmate you. And I, for instance, I've never I have beaten Ulf Andersson in blitz games, possibly rapid play games, but not in a proper game. And he kept on going backwards against me, and I somehow residually believed him, so I could never actually... I couldn't reach his face to punch, basically. By the way, Ulf is a lovely man who I like very much, but I mean in metaphorical terms. But Anatoly Karpov, for instance, and Garry Kasparov, when Ulf went backwards and backwards and backwards, they said, "Well, comrade, you're going backwards, this is ridiculous," and they did reach him, and they did punch him in some very good games. So it's having the belief that when the opponent does something which is provocative, great master though they are, you will go after them and get them. And this is an important point, that you must go for it in the opening if the opponent is being provocative. Not necessarily crude, but you have to. Anyway, as I said, I called it the Cockroach's Carapace. So Carapace is a sort of covering. I'm not sure how you define it precisely, but it's... and the other opening disasters were other people's. And I hope you've enjoyed this. Please carry on sending ideas. A guy did suggest I use a tile game. I don't know, I think I'll use some other tile games. I've got to go now because I've just heard the doorbell. So I'm going to stop, and I hope you enjoy. See you in a fortnight.